And then 24, humility of the heart, based upon a keen sense of modesty. Humility of the heart. I don't know of anything as wonderful as to have true humility of the heart. Because, you know, when I think about criticizing anybody for anything now, yeah, and sometimes there are times when I do have to criticize people. Sometimes I have to criticize the people I'm working with. Some of them, not all of them. But always inside of me, maybe they don't hear it, but inside of me, when I find it necessary for me to express disapproval of anything anybody does, I always say inside of me, well, God pity us all. And but for the grace of God, I'd be the man that I'm over there criticizing. And maybe I've done things that 10 times as bad as the thing I'm criticizing him for. In other words, I try to maintain that sense of humility in my heart, regardless of what happens to me that's unpleasant, and regardless of how the more successful I become, the more I observe this feeling of humility of the heart, recognizing that after all, whatever success I have is due entirely to the friendly, marvelous love and affection and cooperation of other people. Because without that, I could never have spread myself over the world the way I have. I could never have benefited the people that I have. I could never have grown the way I have grown had it not been for the love and the affection and the marvelous, friendly cooperation of other people. And I couldn't have gotten that cooperation if I hadn't adjusted myself to other people in a state of friendliness. Last but not least, personal magnetism. That has reference to the sex emotion, of course. An inborn trait, and the only one of the traits of personality which cannot be cultivated, but it can be controlled and directed to beneficial usages. As a matter of fact, the most outstanding leaders, salesmen, speakers, clergymen, lawyers, lecturers, teachers, most outstanding in every field of endeavor, as a matter of fact, are people who have learned to transmute sex emotion. That is to say, convert that great creative energy over into doing the thing that you want to do most at the time being. And that word transmute is something to conjure with, something to look up in the dictionary until you make sure you understand what it means. Now, you've got a lot of thinking to do about this, and you're going to make discoveries about yourself. You're going to find out that when you really come down to answering these questions and giving yourself a rating, that you have certain weaknesses that you didn't know you had, and that you have certain strengths and certain good qualities that you perhaps had undervalued. Let's find out about ourselves to see just where we stand, what it is that makes us tick, why people like us, why people dislike us. And I could take any one of you and sit down with you, and by asking you, I'll say not over 20 questions, I could lay my finger right on what's keeping you from being popular, if you are not popular. And you can do the same thing. That's what I want you to do. I want you to learn to analyze people, starting with yourself, find out what it is that makes people popular, what it makes them tick. And when you do that, you have one of the greatest assets that you could possibly imagine. Thank you very much. Well, the first half of the evening is devoted to going the extra mile. And of course, as you know, that means the rendering of more service and better service than you're paid to render, doing it all the time, and doing it in a pleasant, pleasing mental attitude. Now, one of the reasons why there are so many failures in the world today is that the majority of people do not even go the first mile, let alone the second one. And oftentimes, if they do go the first mile, they gripe as they go along and make themselves a darn nuisance. People around them. I said darn nuisance. I suppose you know the type. Of course, that doesn't apply to any of you, because if you were like that before you got into this philosophy, you're going to get over it very fast. I don't know of any one quality or trait that can get a person an opportunity quicker than to go out of his way or her way to do somebody a favor, do something useful. It's the one thing that you can do in life that you don't have to ask anybody's privilege of doing it. As a matter of fact, if you're going to be free and independent and self-determining and financially independent in old age, you might just as well make up your mind that you can never be that unless by a stroke of good luck, a rich uncle or a rich aunt dying or something of that sort, unless you form the habit of going the extra mile and make yourself as near indispensable as you possibly can. I don't know of any way that anybody can make himself or herself indispensable except by going the extra mile, by rendering some sort of service that you're not expected to render, and rendering it in the right sort of a mental attitude. Now, that mental attitude is important. If you gripe about going the extra mile, the chances are that it won't bring you very many returns. Now, where do I get my authority, do you suppose, for emphasizing this principle of going the extra mile? What causes me to emphasize that?
Experience.
I get it by looking around and watching the way nature does things. And any time that you can follow the habits of nature, you're not going to go wrong. And stated conversely, any time that you fail to recognize the way nature does things and do not go along, you are going to get into trouble sooner or later. It's just a question of time. Because there is an overall plan through which this universe operates, and no matter what you call the first cause of that plan, or the operator of it, or the creator of it, no matter what you call that, there's just one plan, there's just one set of natural laws, and it's up to every individual to discover what those natural laws are and adjust himself favorably to them. And certainly, if there is one thing that stands out above all others in nature, it is that nature requests and demands that every living thing go the extra mile in order to eat, in order to live, in order to survive. Man wouldn't survive one season if it were not for this law of going the extra mile. Don't render service, $1 million worth of service a day, and then expect to go and get a bank check for it tomorrow. In other words, if you start out to render $1 million worth of service, you perhaps have to render a little bit at a time, and you'll have to get yourself recognized. And while you're going through that period of recognition, the chances are that you'll not be compensated for going the extra mile. Chances are you'll have to go the extra mile quite a little while before anybody takes notice of you. But always be careful that you don't go the extra mile too long without somebody taking notice of you. And if the right fellow doesn't take notice, look around until you find the right fellow who will. That's about the equivalent of saying if your present employer doesn't recognize you, if you work for an employer, why, fire the employer sooner or later and let his competitor know what kind of service you're rendering. Won't hurt your chances a bit. I'll assure you it won't. Have a little competition as you go along. Now, nobody ever accepts a rule or does anything without a motive, and I have outlined here in this lesson a great variety of reasons why you should go the extra mile. I'm going to make comments on them. Now, what do I mean by the law of increasing returns? Benefits, yes. Well, substantially, the law of increasing returns means that you'll get back more than you give out, whether it's good or whether it's bad, whether it's positive or whether it's negative. And that's the way the law of nature works. Whatever you give out, whatever you do to or for another person, or whatever you give out from yourself comes back to you, greatly multiplied, in kind. No exception to that whatsoever.